The knock came soft at first, then firmer. 3 deliberate raps against weathered barnwood that hadn't heard a stranger's touch in 2 years. Martha Holloway froze, her hands still gripping the broken harness she'd been trying to mend by lamplight. Through the gaps in the barn slats, she glimpsed the silhouette of a man, hat pulled low, shoulders broad enough to block out the dying sunset. "Ma'am?" The voice carried a weight that spoke of hard miles and harder choices. "I don't mean to startle you." Her breath caught. No one came to the Holloway place anymore, not since Samuel died, and the creditors started circling like vultures. The children were asleep in the house, bellies barely full from the thin soup she'd stretched across 3 days. 8-year-old Tommy had stopped asking when they'd have meat again. 6-year-old Sarah had taken to hoarding biscuit crumbs under her pillow. "I said I don't mean harm," the stranger's voice gentled, as if he sensed her fear through the wooden walls. "Name's Clay Brennan. I was passing through, saw your fence needs mending. Your roof's got holes big enough for snow to find its way through come winter." Martha pressed her back against the barn wall, heart hammering. Men who came calling after dark rarely brought good news. The last one had been Sheriff Morrison, hat in hand, explaining why the bank would be taking the land Samuel's father had bled for. "I'll work for food, ma'am. Nothing more. Got my own bedroll, won't trouble you for shelter." She peered through the slat again. The man stood patient as stone, making no move toward the house where her children slept. His horse waited behind him, a sturdy chestnut that looked well cared for despite the trail dust. Something about his stillness spoke of respect, or maybe calculation. "The children," she whispered, though she hadn't meant to speak aloud. "Won't wake them," he said, so, meow hearing her through the wood. "Just thought you should know I'm here. I'll sleep by the creek tonight, start on that fence at sunrise if you'll have me. Been riding for days, ma'am. Could use the work, and it looks like you could use the help." Martha's fingers found the shotgun Samuel had taught her to load, but never to trust. The stranger knew she was here, knew about the children. He could have taken what he wanted already. Instead, he waited. Dawn broke gray and uncertain, painting the world in shades of doubt. Martha found Clay Brennan exactly where he'd promised. Kneeling by the creek, hands cupped around a small fire, coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. He looked up as she approached, his face weathered but honest, eyes the color of storm clouds. "Morning, ma'am." She clutched a plate of cornbread, the last of what she'd managed to scrape together. Her pride warred with necessity, and necessity was winning. "You meant what you said about the work?" "Yes, ma'am." He stood slowly, respectfully, making no sudden movements. "Saw your fence posts rotting, barn door hanging crooked, chicken coop that won't keep a fox out much longer. Got tools, got time, got hands that know what they're doing." Behind her, the farmhouse door creaked. Tommy appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Sarah clinging to his nightgown. They stared at the stranger with the wide-eyed wariness of children who'd learned too young that the world could bite. "This is Mr. Brennan," Martha said carefully. "He's offered to help with some repairs." Clay nodded to the children. "Morning, young ones." Tommy stepped protectively in front of his sister. "You ain't taking our mama away, are you?" The question hit like a physical blow. Martha's throat tightened as she realized what her son feared, that every stranger might be the one to finally break their small family apart. "No, son," Clay said quietly. "Just here to fix some things that need fixing. Maybe teach you a thing or two about it, if your mama says it's all right." Martha watched his face, searching for deception, for the hungry look that desperate men wore when they saw a woman alone with children and land. Instead, she found something unexpected. Loneliness that mirrored her own. "The cornbread," she said, extending the plate. "It's not much." Clay accepted it with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from hunger barely held in check. "It's everything, ma'am. Thank you." As he bit into the bread, savoring it like fine cake, Martha made her choice. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but desperation was a debt that demanded payment. "The fence first," she said. "Then we'll see about the rest." 3 days of steady work had transformed the Holloway place. The fence stood straight and strong, the barn door hung true, and Tommy had learned to hold a hammer without splitting his thumb. Clay worked with the patience of a man who understood that broken things, fences, doors, trust, required careful attention to heal properly. Martha found herself watching him from the kitchen window, noting how he showed Tommy the right way to drive a nail, how he praised Sarah when she handed him tools. The children were laughing again, a sound she'd almost forgotten. Then the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. "Ma'am," Clay's voice carried a warning that made Martha's blood run cold. He stood at the edge of the porch, hammer still in hand, watching 3 riders approach at a deliberate pace. "You expecting company?" Martha recognized the lead rider before she could see his face. Deputy Frank Morrison, the sheriff's brother, a man who wore his badge like a weapon and used it twice as often. Behind him rode the Garrett twins, known throughout the county for collecting debts with their fists when words failed. "Mrs. Holloway," Morrison called out, reining in his horse 20 feet from the porch, his eyes fixed on Clay with the cold assessment of a predator sizing up competition. "Heard you got yourself some help around here." "Mr. Brennan's been doing some repairs," Martha said, stepping closer to Clay. The gesture wasn't lost on Morrison, whose smile turned razor thin. "That's so," Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Funny thing, ma'am. Got word from town about a man matching his description. Seems there was some trouble up in Dodge City. Man killed 3 people over a card game, disappeared into the wind." Martha felt the world tilt. Clay stood motionless beside her, but she could sense the coiled tension in his frame. "Course," Morrison continued, "might be mistaken identity. Hard to tell sometimes, but the reward's $500, dead or alive. That's more money than this place is worth, wouldn't you say?" The children had appeared in the doorway, sensy, in danger the way young animals do. Tommy clutched Sarah's hand, both of them pale with confusion. "Wait!" Martha's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stepped between Clay and the deputy, her small frame trembling but determined. "Whatever you think you know about Mr. Brennan, you're wrong." Morrison laughed, but it sounded more like a bark. "Ma'am, you don't know this man from Adam. Could be anybody under that hat." "I know he's been here 3 days," Martha said, her voice growing stronger. "I know he's fixed everything my husband never got around to. I know he's been gentle with my children and respectful to me. That's more than I can say for some folks who've come calling." The barb hit its mark. Morrison's face darkened. "Careful, Martha. Wouldn't want to say something you'll regret." Clay reached into his shirt pocket, moving slowly so no one would mistake the gesture for reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a small leather pouch, weathered and worn smooth by years of handling. 5 years ago," he said quietly, "I was a different man. Did things I'm not proud of, but 3 men didn't die over cards in Dodge City, deputy. 3 men died because they were beating a woman in an alley, and I couldn't walk away." He opened the pouch, revealing a small daguerreotype, a woman and 2 children, their faces frozen in sepia-toned happiness. "My wife, my boys. Cholera took them the winter before I went to Dodge. After that, I didn't much care what happened to me, but I never killed anyone who didn't have it coming." Martha stared at the photograph, seeing in those frozen faces the same loss that haunted her own heart. Clay's hands shook as he closed the pouch. "The law doesn't always see things that way," Morrison said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "No," Clay agreed, "it doesn't. But sometimes doing right and doing legal aren't the same thing." Tommy suddenly broke away from Sarah, running to Clay's side. "He taught me to fix things," the boy said, eyed fiercely. "He ain't bad. Bad men don't teach kids how to fix things." Sarah nodded solemnly. "He makes Mama smile." Morrison looked from the children to Martha to Clay, calculation warring, with something that might have been conscience. The standoff stretched for an eternity measured in heartbeats. Martha could feel the weight of the moment, the delicate balance between justice and mercy, between past sins and present redemption. Clay stood perfectly still, waiting for Morrison's decision, with the resignation of a man who'd made peace with whatever consequences might come. Then, slowly, Morrison let his hand fall away from his gun. "Funny thing about wanted posters," he said finally. "Sometimes the descriptions are real vague. Could describe half the men in Kansas territory." He gathered his reins, his eyes never leaving Clay's face. "Course, if I was a man with a past, I might consider that past stays past, especially if I found myself a place where folks needed me more than the law wanted me." Clay nodded once, understanding passing between the 2 men like a spoken agreement. "Appreciate your time, deputy," Martha said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Morrison touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, you have any more trouble, you let me know." His gaze flicked meaningfully to Clay. "Any trouble at all." The 3 riders disappeared into the distance, leaving only dust and the memory of danger. Clay sank onto the porch steps, the photograph still clutched in his hands. Tommy and Sarah flanked him like small sentinels, their loyalty absolute and unquestioned. "You don't have to stay," Martha said quietly. If it's not safe, where would I go? Clay asked, looking up at her with eyes that held both sorrow and hope. This is the first place I've felt human in 5 years. The first place that feels like home, Tommy finished. Clay smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Yeah, son, like home. Martha settled beside them on the steps, watching the sun paint the repaired fence posts golden in the evening light. In the distance, the corn was growing tall despite the drought. The chickens were laying again, and the future, while still uncertain, no longer felt quite so terrifying. Years later, when Tommy had grown tall enough to handle a full-sized hammer, and Sarah had learned to mend harnesses with hands as skilled as her mother's, Martha would remember this moment as the one when their small family became complete again. Not through blood or law or ceremony, but through the simple act of choosing to trust, to hope, to begin again. The last light faded from the western sky, and Clay Brennan, teacher, protector, the man who had knocked at their barn door with nothing but willing hands and a broken heart, was finally home.